So in today's video I want to look at the quilting of your actual sampler. So what I have done, because we're doing a quilt as you go method, I have made a sandwich and not a cheese and pickle one. I've got my top, which I've done the sashing on, so refer to the previous video for that, which I think was number 5, so this makes number 6. I've got my batting, wadding inside. I tend to use Hobbs Heirloom 8020. I quite like that one, it's not mega expensive. I do try and always use the same waddings on battings, because then what you can do is when you've got bits and pieces left over, you can piece them all together underneath to make Franken batting, which always works. Batting and wadding, it will work either way. Okay, you'll probably see it as both. Okay, it depends if it's American or English. Then I've got the backing. Okay, so I've got all those layers. What I've then done is, because this is quite small, I've pinned these together, and I've used these safety pins that have got a bit of a curve to them, so they're quite easy to put in. I don't know if you can see that. There we go, if I hold it against the dark. Okay, just to hold it all nice and smoothly together. I've ironed the backing as well, because once you start doing this process you can't really iron it. So get all your creases out if you've got folds in the back, and then you can start actually working on the quilting. Now I've hand quilted this, and I have done I'll do a separate video actually on hand quilting, and there is a video already on machine quilting as well, but I'll probably do another one on that. But a lot of this has been done by hand, the piecing has been done by hand rather than machine, so it felt that it was probably the best way to do it was to continue with hand, and also because I love hand quilting. So I've used quite a thickish thread, okay, and quite a big stitch as well, which I quite like doing. I find it quite sort of therapeutic and easy to do, and it is just a running stitch, and it really doesn't take quite as long as you think it's going to. What I have done though is I haven't quilted all over. I have followed the designs here, and this really is personal choice, because you could do something just as simple as I've done here. I have just come inside each of these blocks. I haven't done this one yet, so I will do. And then I've gone outside to define the shapes of the blocks as well. This one here, I've actually put, and I don't know if you can see, but I've actually put a heart in each one of these. What I'm trying to do, and this is where that 1/4 inch comes back in that we're always talking about, is I am trying to avoid these seams, basically because I know that that's going to give me an extra layer of fabric that I've got to work through. So if I work away from all of those seams and joins and junctions, it's going to be much easier to work with. I won't keep coming across these big old lumps and bumps that are going to be difficult. So this one here, the first one we did, which was the hexagon, I've kept this really super simple. I've gone around the outside of the shape. I will go around the square as well. I've then gone round the inside, so this is 1/4 inch apart to define the actual hexagon shape there, and I've gone round that inside hexagon there, and again round the little one in the middle. So I've kept that really simple, and that is exactly what you can do. You don't need to do anything fancier than that. You can just follow the shapes that you're given, and certainly if you're a beginner, that might be a good place to start as well. The point of the quilting is to keep all these layers together. Okay, so when it gets washed, it's not all going to land down the bottom, a bit like a duvet in the bottom of a duvet cover when you don't shake it out properly. It also creates layers of air, pockets of air, and that is what actually makes these quilts much warmer. imagine a pigeon where it puffs up its feathers and then it fills those pockets in between the feathers with air. That's what keeps the pigeon warm. And this is what we do. That's why you wear puffer coats, puffer jackets, why duvets are also stitched in those channels as well, because the more air that you trap within your quilting, the warmer it's going to be. Okay, at the same time, the more you quilt and the more closely together you quilt, the stiffer it will be. So I tend to not over quilt on an actual quilt that's going to be, you know, I'm going to be laying under, or it's going to be on top of me, because I don't want it to be really stiff. I want it to be snuggly and comfy. And you'll notice that with the hand quilting particularly, it has this kind of slightly raised puffy texture to it, which I personally really like, and that's one of the reasons that I do it. If you want a more uniform, flatter look, you might prefer to do machine quilting. Okay, but whichever way round, this quilt as you go method, where we've taken it down in size, so we're actually working on quite a small piece of the project, is going to make it much easier if you're going under your sewing machine and trying to quilt under there. This one here, the petals, for example, that to me seemed fairly obvious to just follow the line and shape and actually turn it into an actual petal. So again, I've just quilted round the outside, I've gone round the outside of the block, and then I've done each inside of the petal, and I've just followed that line by eye. Okay, because I'm quite good at winging it, and it's quite easy to see that line as well. If you're not so sure about lines and you're not happy to wing it, you can buy what is called quilter's tape, which is a 1/4 inch masking tape. It comes on a roll, it's not very expensive. And what you can do is then just stick that down, and this works either with machine quilting or hand quilting, and you can stick it down and use that as your guide to follow your 1/4 inch. Okay, and you can, as you can see, I've just reused these bits, so you can use it a few times as well. It'll keep sticking. By the end of the project though, you'll probably have all these bits stuck all over you, so they do tend to migrate a little bit, so don't be surprised if you arrive in the kitchen with little bits of sticky tape over you. So actually getting the shapes, etc., the stencils, you can buy stencils, but you've probably already got things within your kit and collection that you can use. So if, for example, you have something like the templates, which I've used for the actual piece cutting, mainly the diamonds, the hexagon one here with the diamonds and triangles, etc., because these are really easy to use to mark things up. And marking up, that is just going to be a case of seeing what works. There are all kinds of different things out on the market for marking quilts. If you're on dark colours, do not use a friction pen. It leaves almost like a ghosting line on it. So you'll see there are things that are either air erasable, or you can just wash them away just with some damp water. Be wary of the air erasable, because some of them don't actually last very long. You might finish marking up your block and by the time you've finished it's disappeared, so do bear that in mind. And you can even use pencil, anything that's going to wash, and the trick to it is to test it out. Make a little spare sandwich out of some of your fabrics or something, test out with the various markers, and then put it through a wash cycle on a low temperature, about a 30 probably, so that it's not a really fast spin, because that's probably how you would be washing your quilt afterwards anyway. And you'll see which ones do actually disappear and which ones don't, because what you do not want is to end up with it all marked and then it won't come out. If you go onto any group page on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you'll see lots of horror stories from people, and I think it's that constant thing of how to actually mark a quilt. So in many respects the best way is to not mark it if you can get away with it. Over the years I've used various different things, to be honest, you could just cut out paper templates. If it's a, say with this heart, I cut a little paper template and I pinned it in place and I just stitched around it and moved it on. So I didn't even mark any of this. I just used the paper as my marker. I also tend to use this plastic template stuff which we used when we were doing the fussy cutting. It is by So Easy. There are various makes, but the one I normally get is So Easy. It's very easy to lay your hands on, and there's normally 2 sheets in there. And what I have got usually is a collection of things like squares in all different sizes, going from 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 4.5 inch, various sizes, circles, hearts, leaf shapes, all the kinds of things that I would constantly use when I'm doing quilts, because these templates are so useful. As I say, whether you're using them to draw around, if I wanted to do loads of leaves, for example, for a plique, if I wanted to use it as a template, if I wanted to use it for fussy cutting, so say I was doing a circle and I wanted my bird exactly in the middle, that kind of thing, really useful. And you can scratch on it what size it is, or use a permanent pen to mark so that you know the sizes. Because what is quite interesting with this kind of quilting, and this is a sampler, so you know, this might be the time to sort of test run a few things and see what you actually enjoy. So I'm just going to get rid of that one a minute and bring in, this is going to be my centre, and this one, because I've done that slightly bigger centerpiece, this one is not just straightforward blocks again. This one I've gone slightly out there with the putting together of it. You'll notice that it doesn't have any sashing either side, and that is because both of the sides that are going to join to it have the sashing. So that is going to be the sashing, and the same on the other side, okay? And that is in the diagram that came with lesson 5, I think it was. So what I've got on here, because I've got these smaller spaces, I haven't put anything down here yet, and I've toyed with a little bit of a plique, and I'm still kind of making up my mind what to do there. But what I could easily do is actually just do some really interesting quilting, especially in this piece here, so that I can actually fill that negative space rather than necessarily having more fabrics in there. The interest would be in the quilting. And the easiest way to do that, and this is real Blue Peter method coming up here, is if you get a piece of paper that is the same size as where you want to quilt. So imagine this is the same method as I would use if I were doing, and I will show you in a minute, a bigger quilt, if I were doing a much bigger design, that I would measure it, divide it into however many, and then see which shape fits. So this particular one here, this is easy, it's quite small. I've got that piece of paper, I've allowed either side, because I don't want to quilt right up to the edge, because we're doing quilt as you go, so it's quite important to leave at least ½ an inch of no quilting at the edge. Okay, I've then folded that into 4, and then I can decide which shape I'm going to use. So if, for example, I wanted to do circles in there, I can then, from that 4, decide what size my circle is going to be. And I'm going to be sensible and move that out of the way, because this is normally where it goes horribly wrong, isn't it? And then I can use that circle as a guide. I'm going to take it to the top here, because that's the easiest place to see. And I'm going to draw around it as if I was stitching. Okay. And then I can move it on to my next section, and round it goes again. And I think you can probably see what's going to happen as I continue along. These circles actually look like they're joined. And for borders, this is such a good way of doing it. You can do circles, diamonds, squares, anything, because you can, what you're always looking for with quilting, the same as when you're stitching your actual EPP pieces together, is to sew as smoothly in as long a line as possible, so you're not constantly having to stop and start. So what you would do here is we could start here, for example, and then stitch all the way around that circle, and then I would go all the way down here and then up and along that one, and then all the way down there, and then around here, coming back, and then I do the bits that I haven't done, which would bring me back to the start. But that is the kind of border that I could then have, or as I say, I can stitch it into here, okay, so that I've got that interest. And I could make it a double whammy if I wanted to, by doing a kind of a leaf shape in the center of it, or a second circle, or even if I wanted to, putting a triangle in the middle to make it a bit more interesting. So actually, let's just do that. So you can have real fun just with the actual quilting side of it. I always say it's not just about the piecing the fabrics together. I think people often forget the process of quilting, which is a completely separate art form and process. But what it does is it takes you from this very flat piece of fabric into something that is much, much more textured. So an example being, and let me just shift these out of the way a second. So this one here, now this, and you can see it's been quilt as you go on the back, and I think you can really see the quilting on the back here. I really went to town with this. I think we could describe it possibly as improv quilting. This was my lockdown quilt, and I just got a bit carried away because within this quilt there is quite a lot of negative space. So what I was trying to do was fill the negative space, but with something more interesting than just straight line quilting. So I've got wording on here. I've not necessarily followed the lines. In fact, this one here, I think you can see I've done circles which all fit in, but they're completely against the line of the actual pattern that I've got going on, the block that I've got going on. So rather than actually following the lines of the block, I've completely changed it up so that there's a lot more interest going on there. Okay, and same thing down here. So I've got circles and I put squares inside circles, and somewhere I've also just noodled. I quite like doing that, where I've just, from here for example, I've come out with a twist and then I've just gone around and done that, and I've done that quite freehand, which you may not want to do. As I say, that's personal choice, but I think sometimes it's quite good fun to have a go at something different and see where you go from there and how you like it. And I think where this really stands out, I love the back of this quilt, because that is where you see all of that hand quilting really coming into its own, and you can see all that texture, can't you? And this is just, this was the leftovers from making scrubs during lockdown, so that's why, you know, that's why it's these colours. But actually the colours worked with the colours that I was using of the fabrics anyway, and as I said, it is my lockdown quilt, so I think that works quite well. But as you can see, very, very different kind of look to that. So that's the project so far to work on. So if you can get all three pieces sandwiched and quilted and done, and don't forget, put your borders on, the ones that need the borders, so it's all put together in those three sections as I showed you on the diagram, and then get the quilting done. And look what I've done here, make sure that your batting and your backing are slightly bigger, because for the next part of the process, that's when they're going to get trimmed. Okay, but you don't trim them when you're quilting, because things can shift around as you go along with that. Okay,